the opportunity to write something very, very honest about fear and how fear motivates people and characters, and how we think that we're very, very rational until we're presented with something that takes away that rationality.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
The world is a cruel place. We cannot be the only soft thing in it. The only thing we can do is strive to be merciful in our particular cruelty.
That describes a lot in this book.
Yes, it does.
I'm Sean.
I am Paul.
And today we are joined by the marvelous Premee Mohamed, the Indo-Caribbean scientist, editor, speculative fiction author of many things, including... what?
Insect enthusiast.
Well, yeah, but we can only fit so much in a bio. But yes,
I think it's an important part of the bio. We should not bury the lead.
Fair point. She has written Beneath the Rising series, lots of amazing short fiction, and in particular her novella And What We Offer You Tonight won the Nebula and the World Fantasy Awards, and her novella The Annual Migration of Clouds, also known as the book with an incredible book cover, won the Aurora Award. Currently, she is the Edmonton Public Library Writer-in-Residence. That is a lot of syllables, but also really impressive. And an assistant editor at the short fiction audio venue Escape Pod. But we're here to talk about a new collection of stories called One Message Remains. It's sort of mini collection published earlier. Isn't it actually out in February? It's out in February, am I correct?
Yep.
Yeah. It says here earlier this year, but no, it's February 2025. So it's coming very, very soon.
Well, one of the stories in this has already appeared.
That is correct, yes. So it's coming out from Psychopomp Press, so you should check it out. So welcome to the show, Premee.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's exciting. I've talked to you twice before?
Once or twice? What is time? How does time work?
Nobody knows what time is. It's not even real. It's an illusion. Yeah. Well, it should be really fun. I'm excited to ask you questions about this collection, especially the title story, because I have many interesting questions in my head.
Well, why don't we get started?
Well, but you got to go to the next part in the script.
Oh, you're right. I actually read the script. RFTM. Before we get to our discussion with you, Premee, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us about our show on social media or at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. They might get discussed right here on our future shows. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Sean's Alphabet streams every Friday night at 7 p.m. Your script is wrong, to be part of our interactive live streaming format like our listeners here are right now. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events at Discord, including voting and our Torture Cinema polls. It only takes $1 a month.
Yeah, you get all kinds of fun stuff. Lots of free things. There's a Discord, all kinds of cool things. And it helps support fan-run stuff because we're all broke and nobody has money. Pretty much. Yeah.
You can also...
Literally everybody visually is nodding that they understand that completely.
Yeah. So please tell other folks about this show. I did this myself to coworkers on a plane, and review us on iTunes, Podcast Chaser, Good Pods, and more. Word of mouth is a big deal for fan-run podcasts such as ours, and we need your help to find new listeners for our absolutely positively ridiculous show. God help us all.
All right, with all that out of the way, Premee, would you take a minute to tell us a little bit about this mini collection of stories?
Sure. First, though, I just want to say I love the idea of telling your coworkers about it on a plane because they cannot escape you. Like, they're trapped with you.
They asked me, so
Let me tell you about my podcast.
It was a private plane, so it wasn't even like other people here. Yeah, like they were a captive audience for me to talk about Skiffy and Fanty and how I met Sean, and I told them about the show tonight. I don't know if anybody actually ever showed up tonight. I don't think so, but I gave it a shot, Sean.
I am very, very
I-
impressed. That's like a
As I
perfect
told it,
scenario for a pitch session.
So yes, I introduced you as a scientist, a writer, and a bug enthusiast.
Awesome. Also, I would be remiss to not shout out my writer support bug, which combines two of those things. This is what you have instead of a writer support, like an emotional support dog or like a pony or something, because it's smaller and you can keep it in your bag at conferences. And it's wearing a little vest that says, "I am working, do not pet."
Aww.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm pretty excited for this mini collection. Not just because it's a little bit of a weird format, and I like weird, but also because Psychopomp actually approached me to see if I would be interested in doing something like this. Initially, it was just going to be the novella, and then my editor, E. Catherine Tolbert, came back and was like, would you have any objection to a couple of like tie-in stories so that we can make it like a little bit longer? So that turned into this mini collection, and we ended up titling it after the longest one, the novella, One Message Remains. And then there's also a reprint, as Paul mentioned, The General's Turn, which was published a few years ago in the Deadlands, and then two new novelettes. I tried to stay to short story lengths, but both of them went slightly over. I think they're in like the 8,000 word range. And I was like, fine, help me cut those down. And Elise was like, no, just no. No, they are the length they are. And that's how they're going in the book. Congrats. I was like, oh, well, okay. So all the new stories are set in the same sort of world as The General's Turn. And that was a really interesting thing also, I think, for them to request. When you could write about anything, if you're just emailing somebody to be like, hey, can you give us a book? You're allowed to request, but they wanted it in kind of the same vibe, same universe. So I was like, I am very, very happy to give you something. And then, of course, I had to do the super awkward, let me just check with my agent to see if this is something that will like make him cry or whatever, but he was fine.
So I'm glad that one of the questions I really wanted to ask was, having short stories set in the same universe essentially is not necessarily new per se, but is not frequently done. And I'm kind of curious about the challenges, if any, that you kind of felt in trying to tell relatively short tales in a world, because short fiction has considerably less space to sort of develop the world and so on. And I'm kind of curious, as you were writing these and essentially building the world in smaller chunks, what that writing process and thinking process was kind of like for you.
Oh, good question. Because this was actually not that easy. I don't I'm trying to think. Maybe this was the first time where I had been asked to write sort of a shared universe thing, or like a continuation of something in the same universe in short fiction. You don't have like the space of a novel to kind of spread out and explain the world. And of course, the initiating work was a short story. And I had a lot of people afterwards who contacted me very gratifyingly. Thank you, short fiction nerds, who were like, we loved the story. And we loved how much world building you did manage to fit in a short story. Because you can really only, sort of sketch. And then you have to count on the reader sort of mentally filling in the rest, because there's no room, there's no space. And if you try to give more text to describing the details of the physical world and the time it's supposed to be set in, and the history and the culture and the religion and the politics and everything, pretty soon you don't have any room for plot. So with the news stories, with the novella, you have a little bit more room. What I wanted to explore was kind of the idea of same world, maybe different place, maybe this shared universe happens to be a universe that is constantly at war, kind of like the one in The Siege of Burning Grass, where there's just, conflict, and it's just constant. And so in One Message Remains, I thought, well, okay, let's take the main ideas of the General's Turn and go after. So the war is now over. There's no more war. And now you've just got people kind of doing the mop-up operations, instating a new government, repressing the people who lost, building new schools, telling kids to snitch on their parents, that kind of thing. And you also have our main character, Zajos, who is out here on a charity mission to dig up bodies and preserve souls and then give them back to the defeated enemy. Fun fact, his government didn't actually ask whether they wanted them to do that. Turns out they don't. So that was kind of where that story came from. And then there's the other story, which is sort of also set aside from the war. Readers, I hope, will notice that although the entire book, the mini collection is about war, there's not actually a lot of fighting. There's no actual fronts. These are the people who sort of, are peripheral to the conflict. So we've got Taya, who is a bone gallows maker. And I got that from the idea of the bone gallows in the General's Turn. It's only mentioned once in kind of a throwaway sentence, but part of me just got hung up on it. Like, ew, like who makes those? And what is wrong with them? And then Forsaking All Others goes actually even further with a deserter who's out in the countryside trying to track down somewhere where he can be safe and he won't be hunted down and therefore hung on the bone gallows. And a myth specific to that area, because myths and war, they kind of get tangled up in each other, and one tends to engender the other in very, very weird ways, especially in fantasy and sci-fi. And he runs into this myth of the personal devil that, that is endemic to that area. That's always just been kind of a kid's story. So yeah, kind of the world building is not so much continuation of the story of the General's Turn. It's sort of spinning off it or riffing off it in other places and other times, with other war administration, not actual soldiery.
The bone gallows thing is really interesting because I'm assuming you were aware of ossuaries.
Yeah, which is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
A student, they're very unusual, and a student just did a project in a class on them, basically doing a digital map of where they're located. Not quite everywhere in the world, but a reasonable chunk of them. And it was like my first experience where they just showed me a picture of like this, basically a room built out of human bone. And it's very shocking the first time you see it, and then you start reading, and you're like, "Oh, there's a purpose and a cultural meaning to this." And it's like, well, can I judge this? Because I'm uncomfortable, right, about like being in a room with bones, making up the walls.
Me too.
Yeah.
And like visually too, when you see things like those bone churches, like in Czechoslovakia and Eastern Europe, or things like Riebmont, which is in, I want to say, the UK somewhere, and it's just this structure where the walls are built out of bones, and there are bones in the floor. And when they started excavating, they were like, oh, people were actually disassembled and used as building material here at Riebmont. And I'm like, does this name come from ribs? Please tell me it doesn't. And then you flip the page and the author is like, it sure does. I'm like, I don't feel good. Why did you build this structure out of lots and lots and lots of dead young men and their ribs? And they're like, rituals. I'm like, okay, well, I cannot argue with that. But, like the idea of using bones as something instead of looking at them as the remains of human beings is kind of squicky depending on what culture you're from. Clearly there were cultures and are cultures where it bothers people less.
Did you intend to have like an Eastern European Balkan sort of feel for this place because especially because of the names?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Definitely the Balkans. which to my extremely unfamiliar with it, so I guess tourist sort of vibes, some of the most interesting myths and legends, and sort of folklore and stories sort of sprout from that area, and then it's surprising where they end up later. Part of this too was, I think the book was already done by this point, but this anecdote circles back around, I swear. When I was in Trinidad and Tobago in April, I had a friend tell me that I should be wearing, the evil eye protection bracelet. And I was like, really? Because I think I have only seen those, in like Europe. They wear them in like, Spain and Greece, the little blue dot with the darker blue dot and like the little dot in the center for the pupil. What is that doing in the Caribbean? She said, well, look around. Everybody's wearing one. And she was right. Everybody had one. Most of them were on string. Some of them were on leather. Some people had rings. Some people had pendants. As far as we can tell, that too came from the Balkans. So from that, that area, kind of the Balkans and Greece, through to Spain, where it was picked up, and then through to the Latino Caribbean, and then sort of by that process of diffusion to the Afro-Caribbean and the Indo-Caribbean. So now it's not even considered something that comes from the old world. It's just something that's part of the new, and you better wear it or else the evil eye will clearly get you. And I'm like, this has traveled a long way. That's very interesting.
And changed and become their own. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, anyways, now every time I leave the house, I wear it because I remember that friend telling me, like, put it on, evil eye. I'm like, okay.
The evil spirits of Edmonton.
That's very
not to be
interesting.
trifled with in the dead of winter.
It is very interesting, though, to think about, like, the ways culture and elements of culture sort of move across, from an Earth's perspective, fairly long distances and sort of can be incorporated and changed and adjusted to sort of meet that culture's perspective. And you see that a lot in human cultures. And I wonder, it doesn't feel like there's quite as much of that in science fiction sometimes. I wonder...
As in the fusion of alien cultures into other alien cultures. I don't see that often where that sort of bleeds over. A little bit now and again. Now I'm going to ask Premee a leading question. Premee, have you ever watched Babylon 5?
No. Also, bold of you to assume I know how to read.
Well, bold of true. Okay, never mind. Because in the whole soul collection business, in One Message Remains, I was reminded of the soul hunters in Babylon 5 and how that doesn't go always well for the soul hunters when
Well,
when
I love...
the people are saving are not so happy about being saved by soul hunters.
Yeah, I love the idea though, like on a, sort of academic or intellectual level, and you do see that a lot in, I would say, more fantasy, right? Or more horror. The idea that you can capture souls or capture ghosts or capture spirits or something, whatever you choose to call them, and preserve them in something, some physical artifact. I find that very, very appealing. Fantasy, yeah, and it does feel more fantasy because science fiction, I'm not going to say shies away from the idea of the soul, but in terms of some animating spirit within the human body, outside of things like, electricity and ATP and chemicals and whatever, something sideways from that, not above it, just to one side. I think that's something that science fiction tends to sort of sidestep by saying, no, that's just the mind. And then the mind is something that we can like copy or replicate or transfer to a robot body or put in a jar or move onto a computer chip or something like that. And I'm like, I feel like the difference is worth writing about. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
No, that makes perfect sense.
I think you're completely right, because you're correct. There's so much science fiction that will just take, like, the idea that you can just like upload your brain, and we just sort of ignore the part of like, well, but how is that actually you and not just a new entity? And so when the first one dies, isn't that unique? Doesn't it just disappear? It's just gone. And so when science fiction, like you're kind of saying, that it ignores whether or not souls are even possible is whatever, but like by just sort of excising that from the conversation, it sort of ignores, well, how do we deal with this problem then?
And if is it really
Star Trek does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Star Trek does it all the time. Like they're literally being pulled apart atom by
The
atom, being
transporter thing.
transported everywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The two Rikers, just as one example.
Yeah. Evil Spock.
Or like Tuvok, like
Tuvix. Oh god.
Tuvix and Tuvok. Yeah, Tuvok and Neelix, where they made the wrong choice and killed Tuvix. Yeah. Sorry, I have strong opinions.
You're a Tuvix stan, yes.
I am a Tuvix stan. He is a better version of both characters. But anyway, but I guess part of the problem, and I don't know, Premee, if you kind of agree, is like so much of science fiction, except like science fantasy, which just sort of like imagines powers and things like Star Wars. So much of it tries to imagine it's in like a very hyper-rationalist future where we have like answered the biology and mind questions. And so it doesn't need to deal with that prickly problem nearly as often. And I don't know where you kind of stand in that area.
I think I have read a lot of books that fit that description. Some of them I just, started and didn't finish because they were getting too hyper rationalist, and maybe I'm not that rationalist in my reading. I think the best science fiction kind of looks at the effects on society as a whole from the development or change of some, new technology or new, ability or some change to what we currently have in terms of science and progress. And then it generally tells that societal level story using a much smaller story of characters. And because we're looking at kind of, I think, the issue of scale, I think that's where we depart from the idea of the necessity of tracking things like souls or ghosts or spirits. I just see a lot of things. Ghosts in the shell, ghosts in the machine. They don't really mean ghost. They mean a set of probabilistic patterns that sort of resemble a human mind. So
yeah,
it's they don't want that as a plot point, I don't think. And I can see the reason why not. It distracts from the actual story that's being told. And if something isn't important in the story, I think it's okay to leave it out and just let other people write about it,
Yeah.
Unless it's the absolute positive focus. I'm thinking of, for example, very strongly theological science fiction or with a theological bent. That if it's the actual point, then or if it's a major point, like say Dan Simmons'
Hyperion or whatever.
Hyperion sequence where souls are all about it. I mean, if you make it one of your major tracks, then you can get away with it. Otherwise, you kind of push away, pay for. Or the Sparrow, for example, which is all about faith and
it is about faith, but they don't mention the removal of souls or the transfer of souls or anything like that. But it does at least explicitly say that they believe in them and they mention them. So yeah, I love the Sparrow. I loved the Sparrow. I was not such a fan of the sequel, but I love the first book.
Me neither, which is why I'm just mentioning the first book. Even there's some parts of the book that go squick. But I can be a soft soul sometimes.
A little bit. So given we're talking about souls and things, let's talk about one message. Our message remains.
One message
because
remains.
This is what. Excuse me. Thank you. So I'll just say, when I was reading this from like a vibes perspective, my brain kept going word for word as Forest by Le Guin. Like I kept, like on a political level, I kept thinking about that. And I found it very interesting that we have been talking about like the Baltics, and maybe it's just my own weird sort of perspective because I have a American Vietnamese family, that like my mind went immediately to Vietnam. And so I kept seeing those comparisons. And I find that, so I found like the politics of this, of like dealing with the very real sort of political problem of empires and powers sort of affecting a narrative and the way in which that educates a populace and the horrors that perpetuates, albeit also with souls and sort of mystical materials also being involved, quite compelling. And I'm sort of curious, when you kind of set out to write this story, was this kind of where you thought it was going to go, or did you have sort of a kernel of a different idea?
The ending actually surprised even me. And part of that was from where the initial idea of the story kind of came from, which actually, in terms of empire, the Roman Empire, specifically. And sorry, there's a leggy here. Specifically, their focus on, every time they conquered an area, this is exactly what they did. They would send administrators and their families. They would send, legions of soldiers from other colonies, usually, to try to keep things in hand and prevent like future uprisings and revolutions. They would set people to work building, post offices and roads and messenger stations and trying to get things like, plumbing and, don't mind that fort over there that's full of soldiers, that kind of thing. The philosophy was, as soon as this land is ours, we are going to make it Roman. Foom. So that's kind of what the story was always based on in my head. I'm one of those Roman history guys, unfortunately. And the other part of that too was their obsession with recovering remains. The whole for instance, like Varus's lost legions, they never gave up looking for those dead guys in the forests of the Teutons. They were so upset that they could not bring them back for a respectable, burial and the ceremonies and everything that would kind of give them closure with honor. And they assume everybody feels the same way. So this idea of this kind of overwhelmingly arrogant cultural supremacy is really what the book is being written from. And yeah, part of me kind of sat there like, do I want to do this again? Because in The General's Turn, he's also writing from the point of view of like the big conquering empire, the one that thinks it's going to win. Do I really want two stories in this mini collection that are narrated more or less by the villain?
Right.
But I don't think anybody is purely and completely a villain in an empire because empires are large. So, there's enough room in there for the whole thing to change, and there's enough room for individual people to change. And when I was getting close to the end, I took the ending that I had previously and kind of looked at it, and I was like, he changes, but I want him to change more than this. I actually want him to do an about face, kind of like in The General's Turn, even if it's at the cost of his own life. The original ending was sort of at the cost of his, career or his respectability or something. This is quite different. He sees that there's a cost for turning his back on this gigantic structure, and he's like, I think I owe the cost now. I think I'm going to pay it because this is a debt. Yeah. So that's really kind of where that came from.
I found the Major's story compelling. I mean, he thinks he's a hero. He thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and he doesn't quite realize what's happening to him. The reader knows more about what's happening to the Major than the Major knows for most of the book. He's kind of getting more and more infected with this process, and it just starts off as writing in journals, but he's in a state of denial through most of this book till he finally, by the end, realizes when he's told what has happened and why it's happened and has to come to terms with it. It's a really great way of character knowledge versus reader knowledge and that tension. Like, we know, like, oh, you are so screwed up, dude, and you don't even know it. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that too, like when we were talking about sort of that hyper rationalist, again, the Romans were like, well, yeah, we've got our gods, we've got our little household spirits, we've got our Lares and Penates, but we are fundamentally rational. We are rational people. We learn from the Greeks. We've got our science. We've got our math. We've got our engineering.
We have our engineering.
And then you've got Major Thadros here, and he's like, I am extremely rational, and my culture is extremely rational, and that's why we are going to win over these weird backwoods witch doctors who believe all sorts of stuff. So when the worst happens, he's like, there has to be a rational explanation for this. He also kind of doesn't realize he's trapped in a horror movie where people tend to deny things for a really, really, really long time because they need to, because it's a horror movie.
The author in the work I kept thinking of as I was reading this is Adrian Tchaikovsky's Tyrant Philosophers series, especially the second book, House of Open Wounds, which takes place in a war, and the Palestine are rational. They're going to conquer the world. They're going to make things right. They try to make magic make sense because we don't have this chaotic magic stuff, and it doesn't always go right for them, especially if it goes bad for them as they try to make the world fit their box, and the world doesn't want to fit their box because the world is much messier than they even imagine.
Yeah. There are two things I want to say. One is, I think his decision at the end is very rational. His frame of reference completely shifts because he gets knowledge there that forces him to realize the position he used to hold is fundamentally irrational. And then the other thing I'm really glad you brought up is this idea that, you know, if you're trying to tell a kind of nuanced story about empires, right, there are people within these very harmful structures that are, you know, yes, the things they do are villainous, but they ultimately think that what they're doing is the right thing and the correct thing. And in a lot of ways, the Major is, I think, he has the right idea. He thinks he's doing a really good thing by retrieving these bodies because, like, they care too, right? Don't they want to know what happened to their loved ones, etc.? Not realizing that the consequences of him doing that are quite terrifying, actually, to be sort of like embodied by spirits. That'd be pretty terrifying. But I love that what we get here in this story, Kalamak at one point says, like, what did they do to you? You know, which I found such a brilliant question because it says so much about how a power structure effectively indoctrinates, maybe not always in a very, like, insidious way, but, like, in very subtle ways, to the point where if you're raised in a culture that views itself as being superior, you know, by the time you get to an adult, if you do think that you're not superior, it's almost like a miracle. You know, you're sort of conditioned. And I love the question Kalamak asked, you know, what did they do to you? Like, it's almost like him asking, like, did they, like, it's almost like he's imagining, like, they must have tortured you.
They must have done something
to make you be this.
Because he wasn't raised in this culture, so he's seeing it from the outside. And thank you too, because I love Kalamak because he is our he is our actual rational voice. He's not the voice speaking from the inside to the insiders. He's the voice speaking from the outside to the insiders. He's kind of the connection that shows them, like, you know, I think the humanity's kind of been squeezed out of you, like in a press or something. What did they replace it with? Like, how can you treat people like this? And he's the one who kind of sees, you know, Zajos trying to obey the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and ignoring the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would prefer to have done unto them, not you. So, yeah, he's the voice crying out in the wilderness, and that's his great value, I think, in the story. He's very precious in the story. You couldn't tell it without him.
I really love the character, and that line is going to haunt me for a while, because it is a very affecting line, and I really wish this story had released a little earlier, because I might have assigned it to my sci-fi class next semester. Because I feel like Word for World as Forest is something I have taught before, but I find that it is somewhat of a violent story, and it is... Le Guin probably will come through the grave and strangle me, but sometimes a little less subtle by comparison to some of her other work. And this story, I feel like, has some really deep subtlety to it, where it's getting to these conversations about how Empire sort of indoctrinates people and gets them to believe things that they think are right or are harmful, and gets to it without the violence. Like, revolution isn't necessary to change him. It is sort of facing him with the reality of who he really is as a consequence of the culture he's raised in. And that is, to some degree, part of what changes him. Yeah. And I think that message is huge.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's funny because, he sort of, to use the simplest term, he gets possessed by some
Hmm.
of these souls because he's rifling through their things and he's reading their letters and it just kind of goes up into him. But arguably, he's possessed before. He's not really himself before. The empire is what fills him. It's not really himself as a person who he
Oh,
was going to be.
Yeah.
There was already something there. And now there is just more and other people and foreigners. But he realizes the second thing. He didn't really realize the first.
No, because that's the water he swims in.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, he
what he
just
swims in.
accepts it as natural.
Yeah.
ooh, man, my brain just broke.
Sorry.
Oh boy. No, no, in a great way. Like that. Wow, that is. Now you just gave me something else that's gonna haunt me for the rest of the week. That the idea that he is what the Empire has built into him is almost like a possession of its own. Ooh.
The
Yeah.
logic, yeah, the,
And
the
like,
the animating spirit of Empire.
yeah, and that's used kind
Yeah.
of in both terms, He is possessed and he is a possession. He's a thing that you fill up and kind of send out.
Oh man, my soul is like quivering.
Oh, good. We should put it in a box. Sorry, no, I can't. I can't.
No, no,
No,
no,
no.
bad, Premee.
I
While
have a little
Sean tries to
box.
recover, I will ask a slightly different, more thematic question. We should probably talk about the other stories too, and I do want
Sure.
to. But so I've never interviewed you before, so this is an opportunity to ask you a couple of things. So what draws you to writing horror?
Mm.
I haven't figured that out yet.
Because we get several different kinds of horror in this one little book. We get the horror of possession and the cost of endless woe. We get the horror of this poor young woman having to build a bone gallows and do it right, or else this martinet will do something bad. We get the horror of this poor deserter always looking behind his back, and we get the horror of someone basically in an auto da fe. Is the way I describe the general's daughter. So it's like the four different kinds of horror in one small volume. That's a neat trick. I mean, most people just have
Say,
one mode of horror. You had
like
four in one
a
book.
multi-pack, like the snack packs with like
Yeah.
four different flavors of chips. Um, except
Ah.
in my case, they're all dressed because I'm Canadian. Um, Yeah, I don't know. The funny thing, I guess, is, and I got asked this a lot. They're like, "Oh, why horror?" I'm still figuring that out. I don't read a ton of horror. It's very scary, as you may have noticed. I don't actually watch a lot of horror media or consume a lot of horror, TV or movies or games. It's all very scary, and I can't cope with it. I recently read Emily C. Hughes's fantastic book Horror for Weenies, and like had
Mhm.
nightmares after that because even though it is weenified, it's still very scary. It's talking about scary movies. Um, what I think I appreciate about horror is the opportunity to write something very, very honest about fear and how fear motivates people and characters and how we think that we're very, very rational until we're presented with something that takes away that rationality. And then you kind of see who you really are and what you really would do, kind of. And yes, there are elements of that in every genre and even in things like contemporary realism and literary fiction. But with horror, with the focus being on that confrontation and not letting people back away from the fear or let them avoid it, that's so interesting to me. That's so interesting to me as someone who is scared of practically everything. Um, I feel like I'm writing about it to exercise myself a little bit, except it turns out the supply is endless. Endless. Every couple of weeks, I read another book that gives me an existential crisis, and I'm like, when is this going to stop? But with horror, it's not only expected and accepted, but you will have editors who are like, if you feel like turning it up in this scene, turn it up. If you feel like pulling your punch at the end, don't pull your punch. Throw your whole weight behind it. And I just love that. Like it's a very freeing space to write in because of the other people that are writing in it and the people that are editing in it, you know?
I love that you bring this up that you brought a bunch of different things up about the like horror and the fear of horror, which I love. One of the things I want to latch onto is the irrationality in terms of the response, because I think like if you spend any time watching horror, like yeah, there's like ridiculous examples of people doing the stupidest thing possible to like get away from the killer or whatever the thing is that's chasing them.
Mhm.
But then if you realize like fear doesn't choose the most rational choice. It like chooses like the most immediate choice to get you out of the situation. And like people being rational in fear are like superhuman. Because if you're that terrified of like a alien coming for you in the tunnel or something, you're not gonna react in like I'll just get the flamethrower to be totally normal and like right. No, people are like pissing themselves. Right, the people that can maintain their composure are, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis, basically. Like that's basically it. And I love that. I think you're identifying so much of what makes horror so exciting. Is it like takes away our rational brain, and we have to like deal with the very real like lizard level of human consciousness. Yeah. And that lizard part of our brain is the part that makes us do stupid things. It also gets us killed by the alien. So
Yeah, I've seen writing about it that's kind of like horror pushes you to the point where you become either a robot or an animal. So a robot who has lost all human feeling and is acting strictly rationally, just, cost benefit, cost benefit. These are the kind of, reactions. If the fear has pushed you to become a robot, you are going to shut the door on somebody you love so that you can survive. You are going to saw off your leg, something like that. Animal, you've lost the human parts of you that can still think and be rational. So you're reacting completely instinctively. You're not thinking things through at all. Either way, you're probably, dead. You're the subject of the fear. And I like the idea that even in kind of the bleakest, most hopeless horror literature, what we are still exploring is, can you remain human in the face of that fear and avoid becoming the robot and avoid becoming the animal? Is there something that will let you hang on to your humanity at the end? And you mentioned the flamethrower, right? Like I'm thinking of Aliens, and what prevents you from just, bailing or blowing the place up or whatever is that you have to go rescue a child. And that is what hangs you onto humanity. That's the latch that keeps that there and that keeps you human. Even if you don't make it out alive, you at least stay human till the end. And that's what horror, I think, lets us explore, even if it doesn't explicitly say it.
And that just makes me annoyed about Alien 3 all of a sudden.
Yes.
And how it
no, don't be mean to
aliens. Sorry, it's a thing of like
I'm so mad about it. It's been years. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm a really big fan. I have like alien toys all over my desk. So.
Oh,
I'm surprised.
I love Aliens. Aliens is one of my favorite movies. I love the first Alien too. Just
yes, I love Alien and I love Aliens.
David is listening.
I actually even love Alien Resurrection. I don't know if that's a popular opinion, but I thought it was very
fun, but it
stylish.
I
thought it was very stylish and cool. Yeah.
It is very stylish, and it does kind of fit this thematic you're sort of attaching to it, which is, like Ripley basically becomes like mother to a hybrid human alien thing creature.
But she seizes her humanity back at the end instead of becoming an animal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is really interesting.
It's kind of touch and go there for a minute, but
she's not quite human. She's sort of weird, and it's like she can play basketball all of a sudden.
The nails thing.
The nail thing. Yeah, she's a little strange.
I mean, far be it from us to judge.
But then you realize, like, oh, that's us.
Yeah.
That's our nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're the ones all hung up on this whole nonsense. Like, no, she's fine. Just, like, have coffee with her. It's fine. Give her a beer. Whatever.
I don't know that I want to have a coffee with her. I do like, though, also at the start of that movie where, we, the humans, with our big old hubris, are like, we have tamed the monster. We have no more fear. Ha ha. We have buttons. Anyways, the start of that movie is just so classic and so good because, oh, my buttons will help. No, they don't. Oh, my God. Anyways.
No. It's always that fun thing, though, like where humans... I mean, part of what you're talking about is like when you think about horror and when humans think that they've exceeded and like taken over the horde, they've like become gods, as it were. And that's always when it comes for you.
Always.
Because you will never succeed. Any person who's like, I'm a scientist and I have figured it all out. Like, no, you haven't. It's going to get out. You know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time now. And so the sort of thing that I'm superior to this moment. No. That is the moment you have like lost it. That's like the like hyper rational, almost robotic, right? The hubris that is like, yeah.
I
mean,
when you mention hubris, I think of Johnny Chambers.
Yeah, me too.
She's full of hubris.
She's got the hoops real bad.
Exactly.
and is so aware of it in the first book, and even laughs at it while Nick is standing there like, maybe at a minimum you shouldn't laugh. Like, you're just drawing attention to it. Maybe, ixnay. Yeah. 3 whole books about hubris and actual gods that know your actual name and where you live.
Not how I would do it.
Nope, neither do I, but neither of us are Johnny Chambers.
Kids these days.
Think she can handle it. So I want to ask a little bit about the weight of what is hollow. And again, because one of the things I do, I always think of authors and what their works in terms of other authors. I already did the One Message Remains made me think of Adrian Tchaikovsky. The weight of what is hollow made me think of KJ Parker, because you go into the engineering of bones and how to build this gallows, and the story revolves around our protagonist finding a clever solution to make it look like it's going to work, but not quite, and provide the torture and the strangulation, but not quite, but in an oblique way that he can't, that our martinet of a commandant can't figure out. But you go through you mentioned these little design considerations, because you're almost like compiling this manual on how to build bone gallows. It's a really interesting structure. So why structure the story that way? Make it almost quasi nonfiction.
Yeah, I did actually want it to look kind of quasi nonfiction, and I wanted Taya to kind of, again, run up against like bonk, like the reader does, that sort of sense of the hyper rationality of the empire, doing everything by the book, standard operating procedures. When we conquer this colony, we are going to send our detachment of troops and administrators and bureaucrats and everything down there, and they're going to have like 6 trunks of documents to make sure that everything is done correctly. And that includes things like, torturing people or building jails or things like that. I wanted Taya to start off with kind of the best intentions. And, she's very young in the story. She's 17. She's still very much sort of finding her way in this family around these expectations of empire. And kind of, knowing your place, not being the nail that sticks up to get hammered down. And all she can think of at the start is kind of, how can I help? How can I be useful? How can I fulfill my expectations? So she starts writing this manual. And I want the reader to just get progressively slightly more uncomfortable with like, yeah, you can't really avoid it. You can talk about the chemicals and the resins and the autoclave and stuff, but in the end, somebody has to take these bones out of a human being and build a structure to kill another human being with it. And this is a child, and the family has been doing this for generations. Does anybody see anything wrong with this? And, the whole family's like, no, seems fine. Seems fine.
Yeah, again, this is what we do.
This is what we do. Yeah, it's, like the family down the street. They've been cobblers for generations. And you're like, it's kind of different, though. Like, I just want Taya to look at this when she's never really kind of questioned it before. And I want the reader to just kind of, get a little bit squicked out, but also like, how is this different than most of human history? It's really not. Just finding more efficient ways to kill people isn't the ideal, but we do it anyway. Look how far we've gotten with things like the electrical chair or lethal injections.
I'm thinking of Dr. Guillotine.
Yeah.
Which was meant to be humane.
Yeah.
And or like, turned into assembly line of horror.
concentration camps in Auschwitz. They start off by injecting prussic acid directly into the heart. Eventually, they figure out you can do the same thing with a syringe full of air. It is hideously painful to die from an embolism from having injected air. You're actually better off having the needle in your heart with a poison in it. And just humanity sits there and they write these manuals. They write these books about it. They're so proud of themselves. The question of maybe we could not kill people doesn't come up.
It is really horrifying to think about the sort of excesses of terror that humans are capable of. We're thinking about now, like, the ways that we build these systems that are meant to keep people alive, and yet even those systems are like twisted. And I'm thinking like the health insurance system in the United States, where people could be denied life-saving care and then just left to die slow, horrible deaths, and then we're supposed to like be happy about it. Like, no, this is a really horrific way to treat people. And yet we do it. We find unimaginable ways to kill and maim, and comparatively less fun and exciting ways to extend and improve life. Which I know we're on like a soapbox, but like
we are very much a soapbox this evening. That's fine.
On the subject of the horror, I'm curious, Premee, have you read Junji Ito's manga by any chance?
Look, too scary.
Oh, you might like it. It might be too scary. There's some stuff that's a little less.
There's the one I read that everybody reads, and oh my god, that's quick.
This is not an endorsement.
No, it's not. It is not.
Some of his stuff is much more about like the body horror. My Dear Ancestors might be one where it is creepy and very like there's some horrifying images, but it is not like disturbingly graphic, and it's fairly short. It's one that I taught this past semester, and a lot of what you're describing about the story we've been talking about and like how horror works, etc., made me very much think about Junji Ito. That some of his work, certainly not all of it, which might be a little bit in the uncomfortable zone, but some of his work might very much bring you, I don't know if joy is the right word.
Some horror.
Some horror in a way that you've done deliberately to yourself for your own amusement. Yeah.
So like joy. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, I watch horror and it is a weird. I started really getting into it during COVID. I don't know why, and I found a weird, perverse sort of joy in the like terror of horror, and I maybe that's because something broke inside me. I don't know. It's just weird. Horror's weird.
I'll switch to something less weird. Although I'm not going to go to the non-book question yet. So more of a craft question. So while you've written a few novels, we've mentioned Beneath the Rising series, you mostly write novellas in shorter lengths. What draws you to writing the shorter length? Since that's mostly of what your output is. And when I think about Premee work, I don't generally think novels. I think novelette, short story.
Yeah, I still refer to myself as a novelist in like polite company because it's hard to say novelist. The next couple things I have coming out are novels after next year. So hopefully people will wait. It's funny though, because my natural length that I normally have written at for most of my life is novel. I have like 19 or 20 discarded novels in my trunk. That's the length that I wrote. I think what I like about novella length specifically is kind of that, kind of like we were talking about earlier, sort of that purity of focus. You have to, you're so hard on not diverting from the story too much, or if you do, to come right back to it as soon as you can. And you get a little bit more room to breathe and to explore than in a short story. But you have to be writing it so that it's very, very distinctly not like a chopped down or filed down novel, so like an outline, or like a fluffed up short story where there's like, long paragraphs of description or conversations that don't go anywhere or something like that. Like it's a length that honestly, kind of growing up, I didn't know you could sort of write and get published. I was aware that a lot of books in specifically sci-fi and fantasy from like, the 60s, 70s, 80s, those are all novella length, but they weren't sold as novellas. So I didn't know what that was. Turns out it's got a long and storied history as well. So I also feel like I'm kind of communicating with those who have come before me in my genre, like Michael, write a novel in 3 days, Moorcock, and that he means a novella. And also you don't end up sleeping a lot. But I love Michael Moorcock.
So side note, I thought I caught a Eternal Champion reference in One Message Remains. Am I right?
You might have. If I stuck it in there, it was in there, not on purpose. Sorry. What was the reference?
I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could find the piece
Okay, well,
of it.
email
But
me
it's like I
afterwards,
looked at
because now
that.
I'm delighted. I'm like, did I put one in there?
Yeah, I thought I saw it. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, let me interrupt.
Can I ask you
maybe
another
we're Eternal
writing?
Champions.
We're getting short
Sorry.
on time, but I have to ask you another writing question.
Yeah.
So the world is exhausting, and there's so many things vying for our attention, both good and bad things. And it can, we have jobs and sometimes families and those kinds of things. And you write what I would consider a fairly reasonable amount, and also cats, which in the video, for the folks that don't know, there are cats that also vie for our attention. You write a fairly reasonable amount, or maybe not quite reasonable. I don't know what reasonable is, but you write quite a bit. And I'm kind of curious, as you sort of deal with the very modern stresses that we're now in, how do you kind of manage your writing energy? Like, how do you do it?
It is not that easy. That was one of the things I actually wanted to talk about in some kind of end of year roundup, to be like, yeah, I've handed in 2 books this year and like 9 short stories and things of various lengths that won't be published till next year. I still have 1 more novel due. That's to be handed in December 31st. I also now have 2 more short stories to hand in by the end of the year. Both of those are not done. I just handed one in on November 30th. The main thing I think for me is, and I recognize my privilege here, I live alone. I am in control of my time outside of my work this year at the library. So I'm not trying to juggle that, like you were talking about, the family or other people in the house, or even in a lot of cases, things like housework or sleep or things like that. I mean, I admit fully that there are things I sacrifice to write, but I also have to be really careful with it. I have a couple of chronic health conditions. When I wake up in the morning, I don't know if I've got, 5 hours of work in me that day, or 2 hours of work, or if I'm going to be able to get out of bed, or if I might have 8 hours of work, but I go outside to shovel the walk and I come back in and all of a sudden now I have 45 minutes before I crash. So there is a lot of just sort of frantic self-management, trying to arrange my life in a way so that I have sort of uninterrupted chunks of time to write that I hope might coincide with when I have like the energy to write. And then the other thing, and this is really going to annoy some of my friends, and I know specifically which one it will bug. I had to teach myself how to outline, because that is actually the key that has let me write and hand stuff in at the quality level that I want. Forget what the editor wants. I don't care. I want the story to look and sound a certain way, and I will bite through my desk if it does not. Which also annoys me when people are like, "Oh, she's so prolific." I'm like, "You could say I'm good too." Anyways, they never do.
You're excellent.
You are good, by the way. Just want to be clear.
Prolific. You can only get one. Is also,
No, you're both.
Because otherwise it's like trying to work your way through a hedge maze. You stop here. Oh, I have to make a choice. Left, right, or straight ahead. Okay. You move a little bit. Oh, shoot. I have to make another choice. Left, right, or straight ahead. I get so much decision fatigue when I write like that. I can't even do it for short stories anymore. It just burns my energy down. Like you can watch it drop. If I do that in advance and I have an outline, then all of a sudden I'm not trying to run through a hedge maze to meet my deadline. I'm running on a track. It's shaped like an oval. There are no obstacles, and I can go as fast as I want at the part that I want to do the best, which is drafting. I like drafting the best. So I remove all my own obstacles, and then I just give her. And I'm a very fast typist.
Nice.
With the outlining process, do you find that you've outlined your story, which means you've got, at the very least some plot, the characters, probably some aspects of the world. Do you find that the writing process still brings a lot of discovery and joy and
Always.
gosh, wow, where did that come from?
Usually it's just the characters and the plot. There's nothing about the world unless it's something so important that I need to remember to put it in. Generally, the world is what I build as I go, but also my outlines tend to be at the kind of level where it's like, bullet point 4, they have a fight. She leaves to go to the city. And then when I get to that point in my outline, I'm like, oh, I get to write a fight.
Oh,
So
okay.
everything's still very open. It just lets me know what's happening next and makes sure that it's connected sort of logically and emotionally to what came before and logically and emotionally to what'll happen next. So nothing kind of drops out of a clear blue sky. Even with, One Message Remains, where I changed the ending, I still changed it to something that made sense emotionally for Zajos to have done. Not not for him to change who he was for the ending originally, but for this one, this is who he is. And it actually felt more right when I deviated from the outline, and I was like, I only have a couple pages left anyway. I'm doing it, and Elise will tell me if it sucks.
It does not suck.
And she
in my
said
humble
it did
opinion.
not suck, and she cried. I was like, out of it not sucking? Or
Oh,
she said it
Emotional
affected
reactions are
her.
good.
Yeah, she said it really got to her.
hitting in the
The,
feels is something you do. I mean, it comes into horror, but just in general, it's like we have a real emotional attachment to to a character who's ostensibly a villain, which is a pretty nice trick.
I'm glad it worked this time.
I gotta say, I mean, I'm just like building up your ego at this point, but I have yet to be disappointed by anything you've written.
Oh, thank you so much. Don't read everything.
Like, you know, well, no, I mean, I've read
Yeah.
almost everything, not everything yet, but I've read pretty much all the novellas or things in that vague territory of length, and every single time I'm just sitting here going, wow, there's so much I can sort of poke and prod and pick at. And that to me is, again, I'm just patting your ego, but like maybe you want it. I don't know. I feel like that makes for a writer that you're kind of like Sarah Pinsker for me. Sarah Pinsker, I knew from writing short stories, and there were a couple of years where I discovered her, and she released a short story, and I was like, that's on my Hugo ballot because it just hit me somewhere so deep, and I don't know how to handle myself. And you're kind of in that same
Oh,
territory,
thank
although
you.
mostly for slightly longer works. And so, you've been on my Hugo ballot a few times, I will just say.
Oh, thank you.
And so,
Indeed.
I just
I hope
really,
the
really,
gods do
really
not
liked your
strike me
work.
down for this extra hubris, because that's external hubris. I didn't actually didn't do anything.
It's not Premee's fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. Strike me.
Strike him down. Thanks.
I'm suddenly seeing the show Chaos all of a sudden, and Jeff Goldblum getting antsy. He's like, "Who do I hit? Who do I hit?"
Yeah. Must go faster. Sorry.
Must go faster.
Exactly. Same,
Yeah.
same. So I think we should ask the last question we were going to ask about. So, what can you tell us about a little thing called Edmonton in 2030? That I understand you're involved with.
Oh, I am slightly involved with that. As far as I know, and I have not been reading the emails because I am terrible and disorganized, we are going for a Worldcon bid. We would like people to come to Edmonton for Worldcon in 2030. So, yeah, I don't know where the process is for that, but we are putting stuff together, and there is I believe, website. So I
There
really
is
think,
there is a website, and I saw your picture there and your name there.
yeah,
Like, oh,
because we got invited out to like a group photo shoot of various spec pic writers in the area. So I thought that was really fun. It was
I
freezing. It does not look that cold in the photo. It was like barely above
uh,
freezing. Yeah.
you're in Edmonton. I
We
expect
suffered horribly.
the only
That would
the
be a
only
very interesting Worldcon.
it would be.
Mhm.
I've never been to Alberta, so I will not complain.
I've not been to Alberta since 2005. I mean, it was in
Hmm.
Alberta. No, 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 2007. It was June 1st, 2007, in Banff National Park with a Digicam in Lake Louise. I decided, or is the other lake? I decided
Well, hold on.
I need to
Which
learn
national
photography.
park?
Yes, the national park in Banff.
Which one?
Banff,
Banff?
Banff,
You mean
B-A-N-F-F.
Nightcrawler's National Park?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. For those that don't know, in the comics, Nightcrawler always his sort of
Banff.
sound effect is Banff.
Banff, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, with an
So
M.
when you
Yeah,
say
then,
Banff,
no,
I'm
Banff.
immediately
No.
thinking
Yeah, Banff is
Nightcrawler.
with an
Yes.
N.
Yes, Banff.
Yeah, anyways.
Oh, okay.
Banff.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, that's why I decided I need to learn photography because I've been playing with the Digicam and I thought, like, this is great. I need to get a DSLR. I need to come back to these parks. I got a DSLR and started learning photography, but I have not been back to the Canadian National Parks.
The mountains are
A
still there.
Worldcon in Edmonton in 2030 would be a perfect opportunity
It would
and
be.
excuse for me to
Just-
go back to Banff.
The usual reminder that yes, you'll have to drive about 4.5 hours to get to the Rockies, but 4.5 hours is manageable.
Like I don't drive for hours to adventures
Exactly.
as it is.
Exactly.
It's like, have you met me?
And if you drive, just a couple of hours south, you can go to the Badlands and get pictures of hoodoos.
And the Royal Tyrrell Museum, yes.
And the Royal Tyrrell Museum, which I
been there.
love. Yeah.
Who
And
doesn't
if you
love the
go
Royal
north,
Tyrrell?
you can go to Grand Prairie and go to the Phil Currie Dinosaur Museum, which is also amazing.
I've not been to that one.
It's much newer. Yeah, it's very, very nice.
Ooh, interesting.
Road trip.
And you all drive
Road
on the
trip.
same side of
Yeah.
the road, so we could easily do that as Americans.
Yes, we do.
We can handle this.
I've been in a car that's gone from Minneapolis to Alberta. It's a long drive. I would probably
That
want
is
to
a bit of
fly
a
to
drive,
Edmonton
but-
and then rent a car because it's 3 days of driving from
Yeah.
here.
It's a ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It'd
a
be fun.
ways. So anyway, yes, when a certain person on the Edmonton 2030 team told me that this was happening and I told me who was involved, I thought, oh, Premee Mohamed's involved, really?
Yeah, I'm mostly here for moral support
Cool.
because I'm otherwise useless. I have too many deadlines. But I told the team, like, next year, if you need me for anything, I'm around.
That's fantastic.
I may wind up getting drafted to help a lot. It could happen.
Awesome.
This is American
Worldcon.
Minnesota. Yeah. So, yeah.
Canada's awesome. I
So-
like Canada.
So I think we need to go to the outro now, right, Sean?
Yeah, well, we're on the final question. So
Yes.
you've kind of mentioned in general sense, but this book comes out in 2025 February, so very, very soon after the recording of this. But what are you working on next that you're allowed to tell us about?
Oh, thank you for including that disclaimer because I'm actually working on a bunch of stuff that hasn't been announced and I can't tell people about, and I think I'm gonna pop. This happens a lot with authors. If I had known this was going to be the case when I first started getting into publishing, I would be much saner now, but I've only been finding it out over the last couple of years. These emails that are like, don't tell anyone till we announce. I'm like, when are you gonna announce? They're like, well, when we announce, we'll announce it to you. I'm like, okay, fine.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a heap. I have the third book actually in the annual Migration of Clouds series coming out next year as well. That one is called The First 1,000 Trees. I'm super excited for that one. That wraps up the trilogy. And for those who are unfamiliar with it, the first book, The Annual Migration of Clouds, came out in 2021 and told the story mostly of Reed Graham, our main character who narrates. She also narrates the second book. The third book is actually narrated by her best friend Henrik, who we kind of abandon at the end of book one. Spoiler alert. So this is Henrik's book, and this wraps up the story.
Oh,
So I'm
That's it
excited
coming.
for people to read that one. And I also I'm very excited about this one. I have a story coming out in a Stephen King anthology next year, August, I believe. It's called The End of the World as We Know It. There's 32 stories. I'm shocked that I'm in it. There's some really big names in there. And my story is called Hunted to Extinction. And it's very Edmonton story, actually. There's a polar vortex, and there are things in the vortex. and it's set after The Stand. So I'm excited for that. And next thing that I've actually got coming out is in like 3 days, which is a short story with New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine, issue 3. And my story is called The Betrayal of the Rhinoceros. And it's about getting into a castle during a siege, which is actually not that easy.
Who knew?
Who knew? That's what the story's about. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm hoping that we are getting to the point where I am allowed to announce next things. However, we are not. But there are things coming, longer things, I promise.
Ooh. Excellent. Paul, I'm giving you the last stock question. That one's yours.
Last stock question. Where can people find you?
Yeah, that's the last stock. We only have 2 stock questions.
Okay, you're right. Where can people find you, Premee?
People can find me on my website, which is just premeemohamed.com. And I am actually also on Blue Sky with my website as the handle. So come find me there. I'm pretty active there. And I'm also on Instagram irregularly because the image format kind of bugs me. And also it doesn't work as well on desktop for some reason. It only works on my phone. Anyways, at Premeesaurus is my tag there. So if people want to find me, that's usually where I am hanging out. I also have a newsletter, but I haven't sent it out since I think like June. So don't sign up for that if you want regular updates.
Your Star Trek fun with Evan May is delightful.
He is going to let me out eventually. The day will come that my heroism is recognized, and I'm paroled and given a medal for the Plasma Storm incident.
Oh man,
hear that,
you're
Evan?
just making me
hear that,
really...
Evan? If you're
making
Evan,
me miss our Star Trek game that Paul runs.
Yes,
we run a Star Trek RPG game.
And yes.
Oh.
Yeah, that's where this came from, in case people are wondering. Yeah, because Evan and I and David Demchuk and Brandon Crilly, and I feel like I'm forgetting 1 or 2 people, played a Star Trek TTRPG game for Bag of Giving. And this was the ending, was my character, Dr. Tethys, the mad scientist, saved the day and then immediately got arrested. That was literally how the game ended. Brandon was like, and we're out.
That's right. It was on Arvin's stream. Yes, yeah. I remember. So that's where all this fun has come. I didn't connect one with the other. Awesome.
Eventually.
If I had a campaign that Sean was in, but life has kind of interrupted the campaign.
No, not had. It's just on a temporary hiatus. Don't worry.
I am worried.
Brain.
Your brain will return. Your brain will return. True.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for so much for joining us today, Premee.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was so much fun.
It's great. So for folks at home, if you'd like to let us know what you thought, you want to tell us you read the book and you like it, there are 2 ways, skiffyandfanty@gmail.com or skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions, where you can do exactly as it says, suggest things to us. You can follow us at Skiffy and Fanty pretty much anywhere that we're at, except for, the evil place. We're not there anymore. But Blue Sky, etc., etc. There is a link tree that takes you to all those things. That is linkttree. The dot is before it. So let me do that again. linktr.ee/Skiffy and Fanty. And that is where you'll find our Patreon and our newsletter and all of our active social media accounts like Blue Sky, blah, 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 blah. Please review us. Tell us all your friends. Go buy all of Premee's books, because that is a requirement. If you listen to this episode, you have to buy all of her books, period.
Like I already did.
End of discussion. Well, if they haven't yet, they're going to do it now, because they're listening now. For me, I'm at SeanDuke.net. I am Alphabet Streams here on Twitch presently, mostly Skiffy and Fanty, every Friday at 7 p.m. Central. I have a Patreon, I have a social, all that stuff. My link tree is just /SeanDuke, and you can find me all those places. And Paul, what about you?
Oh, you forgot to check out the histories at SeanDuke.net/thehistories.
Yeah, Paul is apparently is Emperor Trajan, in case you didn't know.
Anyway, besides being Emperor Trajan, you can find me mostly across the internet, except for places like Twitter, as Prince Justin, PrincejVSTIN. I do book reviews. I do podcasting. Hi. I stream. I share photography and much more. I am way too active on the internet for anybody.
Just a little bit. All right. Well, as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws that everybody signed, including Paul, I to make this awkward.
Oh,
And so,
I'm in trouble.
for the foreseeable future, Paul will be temporarily occupied internally by an insectoid alien spirit known as Fizz. And so,
Oh, dear God.
we'll see that probably later. But for now, Paul's just finding out this is about to happen. So I hope you're prepared to go for your procedure. Where this will be brought to fruition.
Oh, God.
Fizz is really nice. He's a really nice guy. You should, maybe take him out for a drink.
I'll just say the spice must flow.
Yeah, he likes root beer, Paul.
Well, at least we have that in common.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.